Well, week 4 is finally upon us, everybody. I'm excited to be here, excited to be live tonight, answer some fantasy football questions. Obviously, can't wait for week 4 fantasy football because fantasy football, let's face it, it's the best time of the year. I love this time of the year because we get to talk about football nonstop. So obviously, you guys know what to do. Anything that you guys got, let me know in the chat. We will answer some questions tonight. But before we do, make sure to drop a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel to show your support. And check out that Patrick Mahomes line. That Patrick Mahomes line, pretty sweet right now. So I do have to say that Mahomes line is obviously the big one this week. It is a free line right now. And that line is set at 0.5 total yards for Patrick Mahomes. So that'll be obviously an easy one to score on. So if you haven't taken advantage of it, go down in the description. There is a link there to go to Underdog. You can sign up, use the code FN. That'll match your first deposit 15 or 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. And you'll be able to take advantage of the Mahomes line right here. But let's go through some injuries that we have seen. And it is obviously Wednesday, so we have a practice report finally out. So while I wait for the questions to fill up here, Kenneth Walker, that's a good one to start with. So Kenneth Walker today, they didn't practice because they're Monday night. So we don't know exactly what's going to go on with Kenneth Walker's situation just yet. We're going to have to wait till Thursday, right? So we don't know whether it's going to be Charbonnet or whether it's going to be Kenneth. I will say the one thing I did see about Kenneth Walker this week is that it's possible that he returns this week. Now, that seems to me like it's 50-50, so I don't know exactly what way they're leaning right now, but we'll have to wait till tomorrow. Mixon didn't practice today. So it looks like, by all accounts, Cam Akers is probably going to get the nod again on Sunday, and that's a much easier matchup to take advantage of versus the Jags. So I'm sure we'll see some Cam Akers must-start and sits questions tonight, and I'll answer those as well. Apparently, Dameon Pierce is going to return, though. So definitely keep that in mind if you're thinking about Cam Akers and what the potential that he has to play. A.J. Brown still not practicing. Devonta Smith didn't practice. Trey McBride didn't practice as well, and Austin Eckler already ruled out. So obviously Eckler, he got a concussion in that Monday night game. I read that he didn't even fly back with the team, so probably not going to play he's not going to play for this week, and we'll see about next week. And then A.J. Brown, earlier in the week I saw maybe he could play, but they also have a week 5 bye week, so it wouldn't surprise me if they just sat him. And Devonta Smith obviously took a brutal hit, so we'll see if he ends up playing. Trey McBride doesn't look like he's going to play because he is still in the concussion protocol. So those are some big injury news and notes. We'll go ahead and start answering some questions, and we will start at the top here. Bizzo Z, what's going on? Kevin S, what's going on? Traded Mason and Debo for Lamb. What do you think? Jordan Mason, I keep talking about this because I think it's important to know when we're talking about Jordan Mason. Like, originally when you picked him up, it's like this guy is he's a placeholder. Like, he's a rental at the running back position, right? Well, as the weeks go on, and the more and more I read about McCaffrey's situation, this is either going to be a pretty long-term rental or it's going to be a season-long thing. I mean, at this point, guys, like, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, but Christian McCaffrey went to Germany to see a specialist, to see what was going on, get an opinion about what his Achilles tendonitis and what the deal with that is. That's not good. That's actually, that tells me whether I'm right or wrong. I don't know anything. I'm not a friggin' doctor. So it's just some idiot telling you what his opinions are, and I'm fine with that. What it tells me, though, is like this could potentially be like an Achilles tear in the making. And it's just like a ticking time bomb. That's like what it tells me, honestly. So, I think, because if it was a mental thing, like, McCaffrey's a tough dude. Like, he would be able to get through the mental side of it. This tells me there's something deep going on here, that this is a problem that will, at the very least, plague him for the full year, if it doesn't sideline him all year. Because here's the thing, even if McCaffrey comes back, I think we can all safely say, I can safely say for sure, that at this point, McCaffrey's upside in fantasy is not what we saw last year. Not worthy of the 101, right? So that, I think, is out the window. So Jordan Mason, I actually do tend to think like he's worth quite a bit in my eyes right now in fantasy. Debo, obviously, he's in and out. You kind of like, it sucks to say this about a player, but honestly, you kind of bake in some missed games from Debo Samuel just because of the fact that like he does it every year. Like, this is nothing new that we're seeing with Debo Samuel. Lamb's going to be fine. Like, CD is going to be fine. He's going to continue to have these types of games, which haven't been bad, but you're not seeing the ceiling plays from CD Lamb this year. It'll happen. It'll happen at some point. Like I said, I don't like to say like whether you win or lost a trade. Like, that doesn't – you don't know right now until you actually see the players play. The only thing I could say is whether I would have done this trade or not. I probably would not have done this trade, to be honest with you. I probably would have stuck with Jordan Mason. And the reason is because, like, the way I tend to build my teams is wide receiver heavy. So I usually go with, like, an anchor. I usually do the anchor/hero running back strategy where I take a running back early, then I don't take another one until, like, round 7, around, like, David Montgomery area. But if you have a wide receiver heavy team, or a running back heavy team, and you're comfortable selling Jordan Mason, that's totally fine with me. Bizzo Zeet, what's going on? Rice, Evans, Metcalf, Chase, start 3. Sit 1 for week 4. Definitely starting Rice, and I'm definitely going to start Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase, he did exactly what we needed him to do, right? Like, if he had, like I said leading up to the week last week, like, if Jamar Chase came out and he gave us what he had been giving us for the first 2 weeks against the Commanders, we would have had a real problem, and we would have to reevaluate this one moving forward. But the good thing is that he came out and he did exactly what we needed him to do. Did 2 touchdowns, over 100 yards. So we know it's still in there, right? Like, may not be on a weekly basis, but we know it's still in there with Jamar Chase. And he's going to be consistent. His floor is really safe. Rice, I think, like I said, like, this is a top 5 wide receiver. I mean, honestly, like, I think people need to recalibrate and just admit Rashee Rice is a top 5 wide receiver lineup lock. That's exactly what I'm saying. He should not lead your lineup under any circumstances. Honestly. Like, he really should not at this point. And then it's between Metcalf and Evans, and I think that for me personally, I said it earlier. I said it on the rankings yesterday, in the wide receiver rankings. I think it's a Mike Evans week. There's something about this matchup here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. It's just getting me. And so for me personally, like, I don't think you go wrong with either, because I think that DK is going to be great against the Detroit Lions here. I think this could be an Evans 2-touchdown week, and it very could easily for DK as well. So, that's one of those situations where it's like, take your pick. Obviously, for me personally, I would be going with Mike Evans here, along with Rashee Rice and Jamar Chase. Arsalan Ahmed, what's going on? Jennings, Josh Jacobs, or Keenan? Well, obviously, we don't know what's going on with Keenan still. I read earlier today that he was limited in practice today. So, I guess good sign, step in the right direction. But this guy, man, like, we're just kind of at that point with Keenan Allen where it's like you can't really trust the dude to do well in fantasy. Like, you could trust him to do well in fantasy. Like, if he's out there, he's important to Caleb. And you saw it week 1. And honestly, like, if you're paying attention and you've been watching football for a while, you can see it in the last 2 weeks too. Because Caleb doesn't have his safety blanket guy. Like, Rome's a downfield guy. DJ Moore's a downfield guy. Right? So it's like, he doesn't have that safety blanket there anymore. If Keenan played, would I realistically play him over Josh Jacobs? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't play him over Josh Jacobs, so he's out of the equation. It's between Juwan Jennings and Josh Jacobs. And it's really funny. I'm glad this conversation is up here, because earlier, yesterday when I put out the wide receiver rankings, I saw a lot of comments that I was overreacting to 1 week. There's a couple things I'll say about it. Number one, they're just week 4 rankings. So they're not season long. I'm not saying Jauan Jennings is all of a sudden a top 12 wide receiver by the end of the year. That's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying is that I think this week he's in line again for a good week. Against the Patriots, I like the matchup here. And Ayuk looks so bad that, that's another conversation. But Brandon Ayuk looks bad, and Jauan Jennings just is really important to this offense. Like he always is. He always just kind of. But at this point, it's like you can't, you can't just like rule out the fact that it's very important for Jauan Jennings in this offense at this point. So, I ultimately do think that, Josh Jacobs this week is in a tough matchup because he's playing the Vikings defense, and if he gets that timeshare again, it's going to be a problem. And so ultimately, I do prefer Jauan Jennings this week. Like I said, I saw a lot of comments about overreacting to the week, and I also saw a lot of comments that were like, dude, I like your rankings because you don't go with what everybody else does. Like you take shots. And it's like, that's one thing I'm not afraid of is like, I'll put my neck on the line because I believe in a player or I believe in a matchup. And I believe in the matchup for Jauan Jennings this week. And I think he has another good ceiling this week. Christian Rodriguez, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Who we flexing? Dell, Jerry Jeudy, Robinson, Steele, maybe Foreman if Ford misses. Well, I'm curious which Robinson you're talking about. If it's, why am I blanking out on the name? Wow, I'm really blanking out on the name. Rams wide receiver, Demarcus Robinson. Yeah. If it's Demarcus Robinson, I don't really have a ton of interest in him. If it's Brian Robinson, yes. Like Brian Robinson's my clear answer out of these guys, but I don't think that's what you're saying. What I do think, Giants. Okay, so Wan'Dale Robinson. Okay, that makes it. He's not my guy. If you're familiar with the channel, I've never been a big Jerry Jeudy guy. I just don't trust the player, and I hate the offense. So he's not it. Dell, I read that he didn't practice today. So I don't know what the story is there, if he's going to be back or, what his situation is like. Obviously, he's been bad. I ultimately still do trust the guy. Like, I do think he's going to rebound and do well in fantasy long term. It's just, it's not, he hasn't been a ghost. This guy has been involved. There's just two realistically, like, Nico's obviously the number one, and Diggs at this point has separated because it's not that Diggs is more important to the offense necessarily, because I think when Tank is able to hit, he'll hit on big plays that are extremely valuable for the team. What Diggs is better at, and what the reason he's better in fantasy is because of the way they're using him. He's getting lots of high percentage throws. Like, all of his targets are, like, at or near the line of scrimmage. And if they're in the red zone, like, he's getting those targets. So he plays a very specific role in this offense. It kind of reminds me of Keenan Allen at this point of his career. But I still think that Tank Dell, when he hits, will be a pretty good player. And Carson Steele, the matchup is not ideal, and he's just not that great of a player. But ultimately, like, the fact that, he is their running back one in Kansas City really was confirmed. It obviously keeps him in the argument for me. Wan'Dale is interesting because he gets lots of targets. I'll tell you this. If Dell plays, I'm going to play Dell. If Tank Dell doesn't play, I'm personally going to play Carson Steele because of the fact that I think if they get to the goal line, he'll get a carry, and he got like plenty of carries. Like, if you actually watch that game on Sunday night against the Falcons, I think there was a specific drive where I think he had like 2 straight, like, inside the 3-yard line carries, and he didn't punch either in. So it's like, that doesn't look great, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, if he gets that opportunity again, he probably hits it. So I'll go with Carson Steele if Tank Dell is not an option. Appreciate the super chat. Troy Babs, what's going on? I really need a wide receiver until Puka gets back. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jalen Tolbert are all available full PPR. Who would you pick up out of those three? You know, if Jordan Love was, like, if we knew he was coming back this week, and he very well might come back this week. It's very, very possible. If he comes back, I probably prefer Romeo Doubs out of the group because, you know, the thing with Tolbert's my second option here. Watson is just a big play guy. Like, nothing is different. Nothing is different throughout his career. It's the same story. He's a big play threat. He's not going to get a bunch of targets. Like, he's going to get 5-6 targets max on any given week. So he's not my guy. With Jalen Tolbert, like, he has been consistent the last 2 weeks, that's for sure. And also, I do think that, you know, with the Cowboys offense, their offense, the way they play, and they really have since McCarthy has been there, they really don't, they're not a very balanced team. Like, if you remember McCarthy's, like, first year with Dallas, that was when Zeke was taking a turn down. And he got tons of production out of Tony Pollard, but that was also a lot of it through the passing game. And then last year, Pollard obviously didn't do great in fantasy, and he didn't carry the ball that much, really. They're not really a balanced team. This is a pass-first team. So Tolbert, like, he's attractive for me. Now, what I will say is, again, with Love, for me personally, because you're talking about until Puka gets back. Right? Like, you're not just saying for this week. Because if it was for this week, I'd probably pick up Tolbert and play him. But since we're talking about somebody to be in place of Puka until he gets back, I'm looking at Tolbert, and I'm like, I just don't have as much trust that he sustains that production over Romeo Doubs, who we've seen it from really since he's been in the league. Like, he's not the wide receiver one. He's not Jaden Reed. That's their number one guy. But what he is, he plays this very specific role, and he's very consistent at it. So I just haven't seen that, you know, with Jalen Tolbert yet. So I probably go with Romeo Doubs out of those three until Puka gets back. Appreciate the super chat. Optortrix L. Optortrix L. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Drake London, Zach Moss, or Dave Montgomery, Najee Harris, and Xavier Worthy. So you're saying that you would get Drake London in exchange for Zach Moss and Montgomery in exchange for Najee and Worthy? If I'm misunderstanding it, please let me know in the chat. That's how I'm taking it. Yeah, I think that I think I would prefer London over Moss because Zach Moss just, he's a fine football player. Like, that's the best I can say about Zach Moss. He's an okay football player. I'll tell you what, the Bengals really miss Joe Mixon. They really do. And London, at the very least, like, you're going to get targets and consistent quarterback play from Kirk Cousins. Like, it's definitely, it's obviously night and day from what it was for the first 2 years of London's career. London, again, I just am not, like, I was never sold on him being, like, some elite prospect and some elite football player. Like, I've never seen it. So I just think that personally, like, London's the better option between the two because really what it is, I see more consistency with him. And he's probably less dependent on matchups to have that consistency. I would rather, again, if I'm reading this correctly, I would rather take Dave Montgomery any day of the week. Like, Dave Montgomery is the best option out of all the guys you've named. Drake London, Zach Moss, Dave Montgomery, Najee, and Xavier Worthy. Dave Montgomery's the best option by a mile in fantasy. Like Montgomery, I don't know if people realize, like he's a top 12 back right now. And the thing is, like, you this is sustainable, man. Like, I've been trying to tell people this for years with Dave Montgomery. It's like the guy that is getting, like, he is getting saved by touchdowns. Like, obviously, like, that's a lot of his fantasy production. But this is an offense that it's sustainable in. Like, Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator in Detroit, he's kind of done the impossible, where he's made touchdowns at the running back position a really consistent thing over the years. Like, since he took over Detroit, when you combine two running backs, they combine for at least 20 touchdowns on the ground. On the ground. Like, this is not anything that's going away. Like, Monty, I think, already has 3 or 4 rushing touchdowns this year. So this just isn't a situation where you have to worry about the consistency aspect with Monty. Like, he's going to continue to be consistent. And especially, like, he's a 10 times better option than Najee. And Xavier Worthy as well. You know, that's the way I read this situation. Like, I do think Xavier Worthy, like I told a couple people this. A couple people asked me this week, like, should I be trading Xavier Worthy? And it's like, I don't, or should I be dropping him? And I'm like, I'm not. Like, I'm holding Xavier Worthy because I see the path for Worthy. He obviously hasn't done much of anything since that breakout game in week 1. But the thing with Worthy is, like, it would not surprise me in the least. Do you guys remember how Rashee Rice started last year? Rashee Rice was involved, but he wasn't doing what he did at the end of the year, but in the first half of the season. Like, the first half of the season for Rashee Rice was, like, whatever. You know, he was borderline, like, droppable if you had him. He was on, like, 50% of waivers, right? So, and then he comes out last half of the year. He's, like, a league winner last year. I'm not saying that Worthy, like, obviously they're much different players, but Worthy in this offense does have a role, and he will have a role that I can see, especially without Pacheco. So I'm not dropping Worthy, but I do think, obviously, that Montgomery is the better fantasy option. So, like, I would, again, if I'm reading it correctly, I would much rather take Montgomery than I would Drake London. Appreciate the super chat, though. Dave Montgomery and Drake London are your players. Okay. So, yeah, I definitely would not trade Montgomery or London. Like, no. I wouldn't do either of those trades. No, I wouldn't. Because, again, with Montgomery, like, what you're downgrading to a borderline, like, RB2, RB3. And you're downgrading from a back-end RB1, basically, in fantasy. Like, that's a no. And Worthy just, it's not there yet. Like, for me, like, the thing about trades is you have to take into account what the value is right now. Like, you have to look at trades in a very strategic way to where if you're sending away a player like Montgomery, like, I would make it clear, if it was me, and somebody was asking me for Dave Montgomery, I would make it clear to them, hey, listen, like, if you want Montgomery, this is immediate fantasy production you're going to have for the rest of the year. So I want that in return. And I'm not getting that with Xavier Worthy. I'm getting the promise of maybe, but you're trying to give me a project player who may break out at the back half of the year. And in addition, you're giving me a borderline RB3. Like, that's just not going to work. So, you know, that's just my thoughts on it personally. You know, I look at trades very strategically. I'm kind of known in my own personal leagues, like in one of my Dynasty leagues, everybody hates to trade with me because, I mean, ironically, I make a ton of deals in that Dynasty league, but people are always like, they don't want to trade with me because they know I hold people, you know, to the fire on every single trade. I'm a hard negotiator when it comes to fantasy trades. I'm not playing around with them. So that's how I feel about it. Appreciate the super chat again. Y'all can see how full the chat is. The way to get your question answered right now is to do a super chat. But until then, we will go back to the top. No, we got David Villarreal. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Prescott and Achane for Mahomes and Tyreek. Ooh, that's tough, man. You know, this is a great time to talk about Mahomes. It really is. Like, this is the perfect opportunity. I want to hear feedback on this. Does anybody else feel like when they draft Mahomes that they don't even have to draft another quarterback, and that you could just consistently play Mahomes until his bye week, where you have to pick up a quarterback for 1 week and then drop him again afterwards? Does anybody feel like that? Because to me, that's all I see right now. Right? Like, the past 2 years, Mahomes has done pretty mediocre in fantasy. Like, let's just call it what it is. He's done pretty mediocre, and really what he is, in my opinion, from what I see, is like Mahomes at this point is basically just like, he's like a pacifier almost, right? Like he's like a pacifier because he's not getting you legitimate fantasy upside. If you actually looked at it, he's not getting you fantasy upside. He's getting you a very stable floor. That's what he's doing. But it's not upside. Like, upside is different. Upside is Jaden Daniels. Upside even is Anthony Richardson. He's not getting that, right? So, Dak at least can get you that. Like, Dak did it last week. He actually was spectacular in fantasy, even though they lost the game. It doesn't matter. Dak was getting you tons of fantasy production. And then with Achane, like, you know, with Devon Achane, I get the concerns people have. And it's funny. If you haven't seen the running back rankings video that I put out today, go back and watch it after the live stream. I accidentally edited out Devon Achane being at number 6. And people were like, where is Devon Achane? You're overreacting. And it's like, listen, if I actually meant to leave him out, I understand the blowback on it, but I just, you know, it was an accident. Though Devon Achane, I don't want people to overreact. Like, Devon Achane, if you looked at what he did after Tua went down in that game against the Bills, like, he's going to be fine. You know, he's gonna be fine. Tyreek's more of a worry for me than Achane is. And again, like, with Mahomes, you're just trading for the name. I mean, that's really what it is at this point. It's all name value for Patrick Mahomes. It's similar to Kelsey, except it's not nearly as bad and egregious. And irresponsible is kind of how I feel about people who really like Travis Kelsey still. But Mahomes he's just giving you name value. Like, and I'm not, like, trying to beat anybody up for having Mahomes. I drafted Mahomes quite a bit this year. I thought it was going to be different than last year. With Worthy, I thought, like, he's going to give them their first take the top off the defense threat that they've had in years. They're just not playing like that. Like, they're just not playing like that. They're making long, sustained drives. And Mahomes, he's just not providing big explosion games anymore. So I would personally hang on to Prescott and Achane if I was you. Appreciate the super chat. Next up, we had Lulu11. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. I have Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, and Dell. Should I waiver wire Shakir, Leggett, and Addison, or try for a trade? Well, here's the funny thing is that I think Shakir definitely needs to be on a roster. I don't know who to tell you to drop, though, to be honest. Like, because like I just said with Worthy, I want to keep him because I see the path. With Tank, I don't think you can't put Tank Dell on waivers. He's too valuable right now. A good litmus test for everybody is if you're considering, like, should I drop this player? A great example right now would be, should you drop Zamir White, right? Like, Zamir White, people are wondering, should I drop him? And a good litmus test is if you weren't you, right? As weird as that sounds, if you were your league mate and okay, let me put it simpler. It's confusing me. If your league mate had Zamir White and they drop Zamir White tomorrow, and he was available to claim, would you pick him up or would you not? That's your litmus test right there. Because that is the perfect answer of if he has value in fantasy or not. Now, I say Zamir White because I don't think he has much value in fantasy. But if you're talking about somebody like people were considering dropping Terry McLaurin before week 3, right? He comes out and he has a great week. Obviously, nobody's dropping him this week. If you would have dropped Terry McLaurin before week 3, how many people do you think would have tried to claim him? Would you try to have claimed him? So, like, with Tank Dell, I think he's in that situation right now. Where it's like, I don't think that he'd get a day without getting picked up by somebody. You can't drop Tank Dell. Brian Thomas Jr., I will say, like, he's getting more important to the offense. Like, this dude at this point, he's their wide receiver 1, and it's really not close. So I do think that Brian Thomas Jr. is kind of not droppable either. I'll be honest here, like, the way that Shakir's playing, I don't think he should be on waivers right now. Like, he's just too important to this offense right now. So for me personally, I would probably take the shot and bank on the fact that people wouldn't pick up Worthy, and I could maybe scoop by without Worthy for like a couple weeks, and then see how those other two players fall in the next couple weeks. That's what I would do. If I would drop anyone, it'd be Worthy for Khalil Shakir, and I would monitor Worthy over the next several weeks, see if I could skate by and not pick him up, bank on the fact that nobody else will either, and then in a couple weeks reevaluate how everybody on your roster is doing, see if there's any droppables so you can get Xavier Worthy back. That's what I would do personally. Appreciate the super chat. Up next, we had Eric. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. I have A.J. Brown and want to trade him for a running back. Who can I realistically get? Okay. A.J. Brown question. It's tough, man. It really is. Like, I think that it's hard for me to endorse trading A.J. Brown right now because his value is not as high as it should be, right? Like, and I know that, like, honestly, out of all the injured wide receivers, I think his value is I feel the best about his value when he returns. Like, with Cooper Kupp, at this point, it's a toss-up. Dude's in his 30s, and he's got a bad ankle injury. Whenever he returns, he may not be the guy. He may be the guy, but he may not be the guy on your fantasy team. Puka Nacua, I think this injury is plaguing him the rest of the year. You know, Deebo Samuel, I feel probably pretty good about him. But A.J. Brown, like, the thing with A.J. Brown is after this week, again, I'm pretty convinced they're not going to play him this week because they have a week 5 bye. So they'll just give him the time off, right? So I think when he returns in week 6, he comes back and he does A.J. Brown things, you know? So it's hard for me to endorse trading him right now. If you're dead set on trading him, like, realistically, I think your best chances are probably, like, Josh Jacobs. Like, Josh Jacobs is a good buy low. And, you know, A.J. Brown's a buy low, too. So, like, you might be kind of even Steven there. Nobody's going to give you James Cook. Nobody's going to give you Kyron. Nobody's going to give you... Maybe someone gives you Achane. I doubt you'll get Jonathan Taylor. You might be able to get Montgomery or Jahmyr Gibbs. Those are kind of the guys that I would target. I would try to target the Devon Achanes, the Montgomerys, the Jahmyr Gibbses, and maybe the Josh Jacobs. That's probably what I would do personally if I was dead set on doing it. But again, like, I'm not endorsing trading him away personally because I do think that when he comes back, he'll come back 100%. Because, like, the reality is, like, they're 2-1 now, and they might not have either of their star wide receivers, but at the same time, like, would you rather play him in week 5 if he's not 100%, or just rest him through the bye week, which is in week 5. So I think he comes back after week 5 fully healthy, and he ends up being a really good fantasy play. So I'm not endorsing it, but I would say if you're dead set on it, then I would try to go after one of those running backs I was talking about. Appreciate the super chat. Ryan Frankowski, what's going on? I'm offered Reed for Adams. Full PPR. Worth it? Jaden Reed for Devontae Adams. Oh, I would take that in a heartbeat. Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's not even that I think that Devontae Adams is going to be a bad player in fantasy, right? Like, that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I want Jaden Reed. I want Jaden Reed because I know when Jordan Love comes back, Jaden Reed's ceiling is through the freaking roof. That's the reason that I want Jaden Reed really bad in fantasy. So for me personally, it's like this isn't even like an anti-Devontae Adams thing. I mean, those of you who know and have been following the channel, you know I'm not as big on Adams right now as I have been in previous years. I hate the offense. It's not the player. The player is still great. The offense stinks. It's horrible. That week 1 upside when Jaden comes back, or when Jordan Love comes back. Now, will he do it consistently? Of course not. He's not going to average 30-plus fantasy points for the rest of the year. But what he will do is he's going to have a better ceiling than Devontae Adams. So for me personally, like, just because of ceiling here, they're both inconsistent, so I'd just much rather have the player with the better ceiling on the better offense. So yeah, I would take Jaden Reed for Devontae Adams personally. And basically, honestly, like, if that's the offer on the table, I would just take it. But like, if you know him and he's willing to negotiate, I would try to negotiate and be like, throw in another running back in there. Give me a running back to like Devin Singletary. Then we'll make it, Because Devontae Adams does have the name value, and that means a lot to some people in fantasy. Appreciate the super chat. Kevin, the credit guy, what's going on? In Dynasty, would you trade AJ for Godwin and Pacheco? Oh. AJ it's funny because I think I've discussed this on my Dynasty channel before. For those of you who don't know, if you do play Dynasty, I do have a Dynasty channel. Not posting on it right now because we're focused on regular season, but it is called Dynasty Fanalysts. There's a link to it on the main page. I talked about this a little bit on the Dynasty channel. It's probably a good time to start looking to sell AJ Brown to maximize value. Now, Godwin is not someone I want in return. Like, if I'm trading away AJ Brown, I want a younger guy like a Nico Collins. I want a younger guy like Jaden Reed plus more. I want a younger guy like maybe, I'm trying to think, maybe like a Rome Odunze plus, or maybe a Marvin Harrison straight up. Like, Godwin, here's the reality with Godwin. What he's doing is great right now. It's great. But Godwin is 28, and he's on a contract year. And I'm not saying like he's only performing because he's on a contract year. He's performed in the past. But the dude's like older than AJ. And you're getting a running back who, the problem with running backs in Dynasty is that their shelf life just isn't as long as wide receivers. And Pacheco, I think he's 25. I'm pretty sure he's 25. Let's check that really quick. Isaiah Pacheco. He is 25. Yeah, so like Pacheco for me is not, he's going to be 26 in March, and he's already been banged up quite a bit. So like Pacheco, again, is kind of on a sinking ship. I'd rather hold out and wait for a better offer for AJ Brown personally. Like, I would try to seek out an offer, like I was saying. Like, I want youth to replace him with at the wide receiver position. I want to get a younger guy like Nico, or a younger guy like Jaden Reed plus, or a younger guy like Rome plus, and Marv as well. That's my take on it. Appreciate the super chat, though. Next up, we had Tyler Sperry. Bench Hurts for Dana's. Bench Hurts for Darnold if no Smith and Brown. It's tough. It's hard to say bench Hurts because of the rushing upside. You know, if Hurts didn't have the rushing upside and he was Brock Purdy, I would say probably. The irony of that is Purdy actually did really well without Debo and without Kittle last week in fantasy. The matchup is just really good. Like, I think the matchup versus the Bucs is actually a pretty good one. And again, Hurts can run. So there's going to be that good baseline right there. Now, obviously, like if Hurts and Brown are both gone, or I'm sorry, if Brown and Smith are both gone, like that definitely significantly impacts his passing volume. Like he's not going to. I'd be shocked if he threw for 200 if he has neither of those guys. Like Goddard's not putting up another 170-yard performance. That's just not happening. So it's again, it's really tough. Darnold's been great. The Packers are a good defense. And maybe, you know, I'm going to say I would probably play Hurts. And again, you can, some people will say that I'm just like doubting Darnold. Maybe that's the case. Maybe I'm just not wanting to believe what I see. It's not even that. I can't trust Darnold over a guy like Hurts when I know Hurts has the rushing upside. And I also know that Darnold is prone to interceptions, and it's a divisional matchup against a tough defense. So I personally would still go with Hurts here. Appreciate the super chat. Good to see you in here, Tyler Sperry. Alfred Allen, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Half PPR wide receivers: CD, Marvin Harrison, Rashid, J-Mo, Dell, Odunze. Running backs are Jacobs, Ford, Swift, Akers. Tight ends are Goddard and Likely. My RBs are ass. Which running backs would you be comfortable letting go for a running back, and for which one? Well, first of all, I want to know what running backs are on the waiver wire in your league. Got some ice. So if you could put your waiver wire running backs in the chat, that'd be great. For trades, like, you know, this is probably where I would try to sell like a Rome Odunze. Like, if I'm trying to upgrade a running back, I'm probably going to package together Rome with somebody like a Dallas Goedert off a good week. Like, two guys coming off really big weeks, right? And trying to get somebody in the range of, like, again, it might sound crazy, and a lot people probably won't take this. I'd throw it out there first, though. I would try to get them for Devon Achane coming off a bad week. I would try to get him off. I would try to get Brian Robinson Jr. if I could for Rome and for Goddard. I would try to get J.K. Dobbins after a bad week for those two guys. So those are three running back options, two realistic ones that I would personally package Rome off a good week and Goddard off a good week. It's not that I don't think Rome can be good in the future and will be good. I do believe he will be good. But the reality is when Keenan does come back, that upside is going to be capped because Keenan's going to be involved. And on top of that, like, where is he fitting into your lineup for your receivers? CD, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Rashid are lock starts, right? So you've got depth here that you might as well use as trade bait for a running back. So I would personally try to sell Odunze and Goddard off a good week for Devon Achane on the high end. If you can't get him, I would try to get somebody like J.K. Dobbins, somebody like Brian Robinson, James Conner, I'm good with as well. And if you're feeling really good, try to get Jordan Mason. Because that's the interesting thing about Mason. Mason is in his own category right now where he is like, people don't know what to do with him. Because again, like, some people are convinced that McCaffrey's coming back, and I don't know why. Like, I don't even think it's like I don't even think it's a conscious thing. I think people just subconsciously feel like McCaffrey's going to return. I've said it for weeks. I'm not so sure of that. Honestly, I'm really not. This whole thing has been really weird and very, very, not cryptic's not the right word, but very, very eerie, I would say is the right word for it. You've got a guy that traveled to Germany to go see an Achilles specialist to see what's wrong with him. So Jordan Mason, you could throw him in that category as well. I would try to trade him too. Try to trade for him too. That's kind of my ideas for your running backs that you could go after, and the guys that I would sell. Because you can't sell Dell right now. He's low level, low value in fantasy. J-Mo off a bad week, I think, is probably a tougher sell too. And you can't sell Swift. Like, Swift is honestly borderline droppable. Akers is a rental, and Ford is just not very good. Don't sell Jacobs, though. Jacobs is your only real place you're running back. Like I said to somebody earlier, Jacobs' story is not over. It's not over. So that's what I would do. Appreciate the super chat. King Autumn, what's going on? Should I trade away Rachaad White to pick up Bucky Irving from the waiver wire? If so, who would be a good trade? Wide receiver is my weakness until Puka recovers. First thing I'll say is you can't count on Puka. And I'm not saying you are. You're obviously trying to get better at wide receiver, which is a good thing. Rachaad White's in a very similar situation, man. Like, his value is low. Some people have asked me, should I drop Rachaad White? You can't do that yet. Because, again, litmus test, if somebody else had Rachaad White in your league, they dropped him, would you pick him up? If you say yes, he's got trade value. So, Rachaad White, obviously, is no secret. He's been horrific in fantasy. You know, another guy who's been horrific in fantasy is like a Michael Pittman Jr., right? Obviously, that's not like, I'm not saying that's like who you should be targeting for Rachaad White, but the reality is, like, if you did trade Rachaad White, that's probably what you would get, is somebody along those lines who's also been a really high draft capital guy in fantasy drafts, but just didn't, like, he hasn't done anything. Somebody like maybe you get like a Jalen Waddle. You know, the reality is, like, my thing with fantasy trades, again, I'm a big trade guy in fantasy. Like, I look at it very carefully, and I'm a negotiator in trades. And I make wild moves. Some people in my leagues are like, dude, are you a fantasy expert? Like, like, what are you doing posting fantasy videos when you trade the 103 from Nico Collins? And it's like, well, it looks pretty good right about now. So, like, I'm not any stranger to making trades the rest of the league thinks it's stupid, and then it pays off in the end. You know, for me with Rachaad White, if you're trying to get a wide receiver, on that note, I would try to get an Xavier Worthy. Because to me, like, Rachaad White, would you look at it this way? The reality with Rachaad White's value is that, again, he's along the lines of a Michael Pittman Jr. That's like his honestly, that's like his equivalent to wide receiver, because he was a high draft capital guy as well, and he's done nothing to inspire anybody to put him in their lineup at this point. So that's kind of what you're looking at here. But you could do that, which I wouldn't advise, because it's like, what's the path for Pittman to recover? I don't see it, honestly. So would I rather do that, or would I rather get a guy I can see the path for and just isn't doing it right now? That guy's Xavier Worthy for me. That is somebody like maybe a Brian Thomas Jr., if you could convince him. That window may have closed. That is somebody like a maybe Jackson Smith-Njigba, if you could convince somebody. Maybe a Terry McLaurin. Like, I want to see the path for somebody, because Rachaad White is so low value right now that if you trade him, you have to go for a big swing, because this guy is going down. He's a sinking ship in fantasy. And I want him off my team, but I don't want to get another sinking ship in return for a sinking ship. So, you know what I mean? Like, Michael Pittman's a sinking ship too. So that's what I would do, is I would try to get like an Xavier Worthy high upside guy. And yes, like, I would do it. Like, I would do it personally. I would grab Bucky Irving off the waiver wires, because, again, that's a guy who's like, I've been saying it for weeks now. That's a guy that's about to take over this role. It may not be this week. I honestly don't expect it to be this week. I think it's another week or two. But it's coming. It's coming. He's just been the better back in that offense for the entire season. So, yeah, I would personally do exactly that. And again, appreciate the super chat. Gabriel Polk, you were up next. Appreciate the super chat. Flex, Jennings, Tyreek, or Tony Pollard? Yeah, this is a good, are you feeling ballsy? Are you feeling ballsy today? Because for me, I don't play fantasy scared. And again, I went through this on the running back rankings video today. And it is important, or the wide receiver rankings yesterday, and it is important to note that with Tyreek Hill, I don't think people should overreact to him too much. Because I do think, he's going to give you a good fantasy week when you least expect it. Because that's Tyreek. He is going to give you that because he's a great player. It's just the reality with him is that he's in a bad offense right now. So you have to kind of ride this out with Tyreek. Now, that being said, again, I see sustainability in the short term. Make sure those are the keywords. In the short term. 4 keywords right there with Juwan Jennings. Jennings this week, it looks like he's without Debo again. And Kittle, I saw he was limited today. If Kittle's back, I would play Tyreek. But if he's not back and Brock Purdy does play, Juwan Jennings is my guy. The problem is there's a lot of moving parts in San Fran. What the important pieces are is Debo's out, so let's just rule him out. If Kittle doesn't play, and if Brock Purdy does, I'm going Juwan Jennings. But if if Kittle does play or Brock Purdy's out, I'll play Tyreek. And Pollard, I want to see a better week. I don't think he has zero upside. He's taking on the Dolphins. I love the matchup. I would just rather take one of those wide receivers. I think they have higher upside. Appreciate the super chat. G Medina, what's going on? Help me pick my wide receiver 2 this week. Ayuk or Deontay Johnson? That's the great thing about fantasy. Honestly, this is what I love about fantasy is that it is unpredictable. There's a lot of things that, there's a lot of things I can predict, and there's a lot of things I can't. That's just the nature of it. And that's why I love it, is because I'm always learning. If it was easy, it'd be boring. It's not easy. Brandon Ayuk, before the season, and even 2 weeks ago, I would have said, there's no friggin' way in the world that I'm playing Deontay over Ayuk. At this point, Deontay's my guy. I'm taking him this week over Ayuk. Because, again, Ayuk has had opportunities, and he's going to continue to get them. So that is important to know. And, again, I believe at some point he will rebound. But he looks bad. I mean, let's just call it how it is. He looks bad. This dude looks he looks rusty. He looks bad. And it looks like he's mentally still being bothered by something. That whole thing was so freaking weird this offseason with his contract negotiations. It has made me nervous with his long-term, longevity as a player this year. Particularly this year. I think he'll be fine, next year. But, this year, I'm already worried about the guy. Because he just has not been good at all. And he's had friggin' opportunities. That's the thing. Opportunities are not they're not scarce. I think he had 10 targets last week, and he was garbage. So, this week against the Patriots matchup is good, but he's had opportunities. It just doesn't, it's not there. Now, with Andy Dalton, he's already the confirmed starter this week. So to me, it's okay, this guy was really good. He's already been the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I'll cut Deontay some slack. The thing with freaking Bryce, he's horrible. He is awful. So, yeah, to me, it's just I think that Deontay against the Bengals, the matchup is so good. And Ayuk, I just need to see it first. and they're both probably getting equal amount of targets, but Deontay looks better right now, and he's got just as easy of a matchup. So I'm going to go with Deontay. Appreciate the super chat. Jeremy Melendez, you're up next. Appreciate the super chat. I'm 0-3 and just traded Laporta and Ridley for Adams and McBride. Trade Bowers and Brooks for David Montgomery. My RB1 is Gibbs and my RB2 is Swift. Also have Braylon Allen. You know, the thing is, you're 0-3, right? 0-3 teams, like if you make the right moves and you stay at it, you can make the playoffs and win the whole thing. You know, you shouldn't panic this early. I'm not saying you are. But here's the reality with being 0-3 is you've got to get a win. Like, you've got to get a win. And the thing with McBride is you're not getting to play him this week. I like the move long term. I prefer McBride long term. This trade was kind of like a trade I would have made if I was 3-0 or 2-1 or even 1-2. You kind of need a win this week. And I like the trade. Like, I think it's going to be good for you long term. But the reality is, like, if you trade away Bowers, what's your tight end move this week? Do you have? I mean, because if that's a question. That's not a rhetorical. If you have options on the waiver wire and you also have space on your roster that you can make this move, then that's okay. Like, you can survive a week without McBride. But what I will say is Bowers is a top 3 tight end. McBride is too, but you're just not getting that this week, and you need to win. You need to win this week. So it's hard for me to say to trade Bowers today. Because if you were 3-0, I would do this trade in a heartbeat. Especially since you have McBride. Like, I'd be like, okay, you can stream a tight end for a week, like, knock yourself out, no big deal. For me personally, I probably would do this, yeah. Because I guess, you know, I would do it still. I would trade Bowers and Brooks for Montgomery because Gibbs and Monty are both going to get you 12 to 15 points each. And Adams and Ridley are basically in the same boat. Like, they're basically in the same boat. So it's not like you get an advantage one or the other. They're both streaky. They're both with bad quarterbacks. They're both really good receivers who can go off at any time. And so I think that you can make up ground at the tight end position with Monty in addition to Gibbs. So if you can, you know, if you have the roster space to stream a tight end this week, then I've got no problem with this one. I would do it myself. I like the move long term. Like I said, the only concern I have with it is that you're 0-3 and you need a win this week. Appreciate the super chat. Kevin, the credit guy. What's going on, man? Good to see you back. Dynasty. AJ for Reed and Jacobs got offered that. Man, were you making negotiations as we're live streaming right now? I love it. I love the initiative. Jacobs is an older player too. I'm putting myself in your shoes because Dynasty is obviously long term. Thing with AJ, you're going to miss those big games that he can still put up for the next 2 years. Jaden, as much as I like him, he's very streaky, and he will be. And Jacobs, his clock is ticking. I think I want maybe a little younger running back. Because the thing with Dynasty is, like, you have to look into the future years. And with Jacobs, he's already an older player, number one. And he's also... Jacobs is also if you actually look at his contract, I didn't realize this until like after the fact. If you actually look at Jacobs' contract, there's not a ton of guarantees in there. Like it's less than half the value of his contract. So basically what they're saying is like, if we get through 2 years and you're not that good, we could just easily cut you. So I am worried about Jacobs in that regard, especially like the way things have been going for him so far. That's not a long-term indictment, but just tea leaves to read in a dynasty context. I probably want a younger running back. I probably want a running back like... I probably want a running back like a... I'm thinking. Like a Kenneth Walker, maybe. Because again, like you can't just sell AJ Brown just because. Like AJ is still a very valuable dynasty asset, and Jaden Reed's like on the up and up. He's on the come up for sure, but he's not there. So you need more, and Jacobs is just a descending asset. So you got to get younger at running back here or wide receiver. That's what I would say. I would try to get someone like a Kenneth Walker. Maybe James Cook would be awesome. I don't know if you'll get that, but that's what I would shoot for. I would shoot for younger. Jacobs is just getting too old for me. Appreciate the super chat. Mac Graham, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Half PPR, 12 team. I traded Mason, CMC, and London for HN and Nico. Should I try and trade for Mostert or grab Wright off waivers? Also, trade W or L. You traded Mason, CMC, and London for HN and Nico. I like the move. Because again, CMC, the name value is in there for the trade, but the guy realistically is not, like I've said, he's not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination to come back. Not at all. I like the trade. Achan's top 10 and Nico's top 5. Should you try and trade for Mostert or grab Wright off waivers? Mostert to me is like, I'm not saying he's done because obviously we only seen one game. That's the thing. You got to be fair to Mostert because we've only seen one game from Mostert. Now, the problem with Raheem Mostert is I think he's going to suffer from no Tua as well because Mostert is an older player, obviously. And on top of that, like, he's not getting pass catching work. So a running back is really dependent on what their quarterback can do, and how much efficiency they can get is really dependent on how much the quarterback can do. Mostert, I think, is in trouble. I think he's in trouble for sure. I look at Wright as a player that obviously didn't show well in his first year, but in his first game. But I will say that Wright, I could easily see providing value later on, which right now doesn't inspire me to go pick him up off the wire. Like, it doesn't, you're not in a situation right now where enough people have their eyes on Wright. Like, he's on your waivers for a reason. Like, nobody's looking probably at grabbing Jalen Wright because, like, he was a hyped player to an extent before the season started. Like, in drafts, people wanted him. I was saying draft the guy. And then he had an opportunity on the field in week 2, and he didn't do anything, right? So you can't go out and pick him up over a Bucky Irving or a Braylon Allen, and I'm sure Braylon's not on your waiver, but Bucky might be. Like, you can't do that right now because nobody's looking at him, right? So I don't agree with picking up a running back just because, like, he's a handcuff per se. Like, he's not even a guaranteed handcuff. And the only way I would trade for Mostert is if it was low. Like it would need to be like a Gus Edwards trade. Like those two guys, they're both handcuffs at this point, and they're both like on the down low. So maybe the Dobbins owner has Mostert and you have Gus Edwards. Like that's an example of what I would do personally. Because you can't spend anything real on Mostert at this point. I mean, this guy, like I said, he's going to experience issues here. So I would probably just not grab right off waivers, and the only way I would trade for Mostert is if it was for low level stuff. And I think the trade, like I said, I would have done the same thing. I like the trade. Appreciate the super chat. All right, we're gonna go back up to the top here. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And make sure to take advantage. Patrick Mahomes, his line on underdog, half a yard. Obviously, great line to take advantage of. If you haven't taken advantage of it, there's a link in the description. Use code FN. They'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 when you deposit at least $10. And it is a great way to support the channel. If you do want to support the channel, that is a big way to support the channel. I would appreciate it. But either way, love you guys. G Medina, just wanted to thank you. Keep it up. Doing great. I appreciate you being here, G Medina. I appreciate your support. It's always good to see you in here. Nate Dogg, my man, what's going on? Can I trade Brian Robinson 1-for-1 with Bijan, Cook, Neighbors, and Jennings and Kupp or A.J. Brown? So you would rather... So you're selling Brian Robinson, right? Is that what you're saying, Nate Dogg? You're selling Brian Robinson, and these are the guys that you want to get? You may have an outside shot of getting Bijan for Brian Robinson straight up. That probably won't happen, though. Probably won't happen because Bijan's got the name value. And people, I noticed today when I ranked him low, it didn't even feel low to me. Like when I ranked him where I ranked him, people were pissed. But Bijan truthers were like, how could you put him so low? And it's like, the matchup sucks. And he hasn't done very much. So, Brian Robinson, you may have an outside shot to get Bijan. Probably won't happen, though. Cook, I don't think you'll have a shot. Like, James Cook is top 5. I really struggle to see you getting James Cook in return for Brian Robinson. As much as I like Brian Robinson, and I like him a lot this year, he's not James Cook. So that's probably a no. Neighbors is probably a no. He's the wide receiver 1 in fantasy right now. And I don't want to get Jennings. Like, I don't want to get Jennings. He's a short-term upside guy. He's a short-term upside guy. So I'd much rather have Brian Robinson. Kupp, again, I don't want Kupp either. Like, Kupp may or may not do well when he does come back. And it may be weeks before we see him come back. A.J. Brown, you might want to throw it out there. Like, A.J. Brown is probably someone, like, I would do the trade if I could get A.J. Brown. But if I can't get A.J. Brown, like, I don't personally particularly want to sell Brian Robinson too much. I think he's a good fantasy back this year. And he's been good, and last week was kind of a down week for him, so it's like, I don't think you're going to get a ton of those guys that you named. Like, for me, realistically, I think people would be able to send you, like, if you're being realistic and you're not shooting for the stars on these trades, you're probably realistically going to get, like, maybe you could get J.K. Dobbins. You could maybe get James Conner, but you're probably in the range of, like, Ramondre, Zach Moss, guys like that. Somebody like a Jameson Williams, or maybe a Drake London on the high end. Like, Brian Robinson, his name value isn't that great, and people will look to that game on Sunday night, I think, and be like, he's not that great. Out of the list that you gave, I would try to get Bijan and see if I could do it, I would try to get A.J. Brown as well. I mean, I don't see. There's no harm in trying any of them. Like, I'll throw stuff out to people, but I don't think you're going to get Cook or Neighbors for him, and I personally wouldn't advise you to send Brian Robinson for Jennings or Kupp. So that's what I would do personally, is try to send for Bijan or A.J. Brown. But if you can't get him, don't stoop too low. Brian Robinson's valuable. And in one of these weeks, like, if you really want to trade him, one of these weeks he will be really good in fantasy. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Good to see you in here, Nate Dogg. Always appreciate you and appreciate the super chat. Hunter Collins, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Do I trade Adams and Connor for Evans and Jacobs? Yeah, I would do it. Mostly because I think that Evans is a great buy low. And I also think that with Evans, like, he's going to be better long term. And it really, like, the question I have with Evans is, like, how consistent will he be this year? Because last year, like, the thing was, he was so consistently giving you upside weeks. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case this year, because Godwin is much better this year than he was last year. Excuse me. Godwin's much better this year than he was last year. So I think that Evans could struggle with consistency. But so does Adams. Adams is going to struggle with consistency all year. So it's not like you're not getting, like, some big, you're not getting a big drop off with Evans. I prefer Evans long term. Connor and Jacobs are honestly close to even. Like, I still value Jacobs more than most do in fantasy. Jacobs' story, I keep saying it, it's not over. Jacobs' story is not over this year in fantasy. It's just not. That guy is going to rebound and have a great week. Because take two things into account. Number one, they were comfortable enough to use him 30 times in week 2. And he did really freaking well with all those touches. The only reason that week wasn't good in fantasy is because, number one, he fumbled the ball, and number two, he obviously didn't get in the end zone. But the guy was really efficient with his work. Last week, obviously, they gave him help. They gave him help, and they gave him Emmanuel Wilson, and just said, here, like, we'll give you a little bit of a week off. The thing is that if you take that and combine it with the way the Packers have used running backs over the years, with Matt LaFleur, is with, like, Aaron Jones, for example, like, he was used sparingly, mainly because I think he's an injury-prone guy at this point, and he can't handle the workload that Jacobs can. But he was also, like, able to provide massive weeks. I think Jacobs is just, we're going through a patch with Jacobs where it's just unlucky he hasn't gotten in the end zone. The volume, it suggests he needs to get in the end zone. So with Connor, like, the one downside with Connor is that he's going to see games where he misses because of injury. So I would personally take the Evans and Jacobs side. Appreciate the super chat. Irvin Sanchez, you're up next. Appreciate the super chat today. Sit 1, Garrett Wilson, Tyreek, Deontay Johnson. It's so funny because I got tons of flack for yesterday for ranking Garrett Wilson at 20. Actually, I wouldn't say tons. I got some flack for ranking Garrett Wilson at 20. And again, some people who watch, like, don't realize their weekly rankings. Garrett Wilson's number 20 this week because he's taking on Pat Surtain. This is why I value defense so much in fantasy, because not only can you get fantasy points from the right defense, and I play IDP as well, which is individual defensive players, But also, when you look at a guy like Pat Surtain, who's the corner for Denver, that dude has been shutting number ones down this year. Shutting them down. Like, his success rate this year against number ones has been really good. He shut down DK in week 1. He shut down Mike Evans last week. The only wide receiver he didn't get the best of was, ironically, George Pickens in week 2. And Pickens wasn't even great in fantasy. I think he could have been if he had a better quarterback and a better offense. But with Wilson, like, I don't think Wilson's as good of a player as Evans. So it's like, with Wilson, he's going to struggle this week. I really do think so. Again, with Tyreek, I'm not that worried. Like, I know he's going to have a good game at some point. He will. It's going to come. Maybe this week, may not be this week, but I'm going to play him. And then Deontay, I would play him as well because I just see the better matchup with just as many targets and a quarterback who is pushing him the ball at a much more accurate rate. So I would go with Deontay, and I would go with Tyreek, and I would personally sit Garrett Wilson. Appreciate the super chat. Medina, what's going on? God offered Laporta for Jacobs and Pitts. Good trade? No, I wouldn't take this. No. Laporta, listen, like, I like Laporta better than Pitts in fantasy on the long end of the season, but I ultimately think that it's not that much better. Like, it's really not. Like, it's like Laporta at this point has to be reevaluated as one of the rest, right? Like, he's not the standout wide receiver or the standout tight end that he was last year. Like, he's not. Typically in fantasy, like, what we've seen over the years has been there's like 2 or 3 standout tight ends that are just like in their own tiers, right? Like, historically, it's been Kelsey, Kittle. Some years it was Darren Waller. Some years it was Mark Andrews. But those are the guys, like, over the years that have been just in their own tier above the rest. Laporta's not that guy right now. It's not him. So, as far as I'm concerned, like, he's pretty much close enough to Kyle Pitts, and on about. I think it's a great buy low. Like, he's not getting Jacobs from me if I'm you. And again, like, there's just, if he was offering, honestly, there's not even a single tight end I would do it for right now. Like, maybe McBride. I might do it for Trey McBride, but Laporta just, like, it's not there. It's not there. There's not enough of a separating factor. And you said Andrews is your other tight end. I mean, it's rough, right? Like, Andrews is rough right now. Honestly, it's a really rough situation. No, I would take Jacob. I would still hang on to Jacobs and Pitts. You're gonna be fine at tight end. Like, Pitts is good enough. He's just as good, basically, as Laporta. Really, like, realistically, he really is just kind of, like, just as good. I still think Laporta has more upside in the future, but based on what you're getting right now, like, it's just not worth it for me. I'd rather keep Jacobs. And I appreciate the super chat. We'll take a couple more questions, then we're going to go ahead and sign off for the night. Tomorrow, kicker rankings and tight end rankings as well. So start JMO or Ford in my flex this week. I would go with Jameson. Yeah, I would go with Jameson. I think he is the better upside option here. Matchup's good for Ford this week, but I just don't, like, he's just not getting the volume. And he's really just not been that great in fantasy. Chris Cross, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Trade Achane, Reed for CD, 3-0, 12-team PPR, 3 wide receivers, 2 running back, 1 flex. Your team is Kyler, Mason, Ford, Dowdle, Javonte, JJ, MHJ, Shakir, Pittman, Komet, and Andrews. I mean, if you the thing is, if you trade Achane, your running backs are taking a massive hit. You're rolling the dice on those situations here with those running backs because, like, here's the thing. Right now, your wide receiver 3 behind JJ and Marvin Harrison is either Shakir or Jaden Reed. Those are great number 3 wide receiver options. So if you trade one of those guys for a wide receiver 1, I'll give it to you. Your wide receiver trio will be really good. But at the same time, like, your running backs are so questionable outside of Mason. If you were 0-3, I would say go for it. But since you're 3-0, like, it doesn't make sense to me to mess with something that's working. I get it. Like, you could see a weakness on your team here, and you're trying to upgrade it. For me personally, this is not necessarily an upgrade, though. I would stick with it because Achane's going to be fine. Achane's going to continue to provide your team tons of massive upside. So that's what I would do personally. I would stick with Achane. I would stick with Jaden Reed. And just keep in mind, like, with this situation here, like, you're 3-0. You don't really want to mess with something that's working. And the thing is, like, if you do this, your running backs here, it's going to be really hard to decipher what to do at running back 2 every single week. So I would hang on to those guys. Appreciate the super chat, Chris Cross. Good to see you in here. JT Blue Gobs, what's going on, my man? Should I trade Evans and Chuba for Jaden Daniels and Terry? Evans is my wide receiver 3, and AR5 is my quarterback. I'm panicking on AR5. I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. Giving up Evans is obviously tough. But if he's your wide receiver 3, like, it makes him more easy to swallow. Chuba, I like him a lot. Like, for those of you who've been with me in the offseason, like, you know I love Chuba. And I'm really happy to see what he did in week 3. But at the same time, like, what do they do with Jordan Brooks when he comes back? You know? Jaden Daniels, like, he's the wide receiver 2. He's the wide receiver 2. He's the quarterback 2 right now in fantasy. Jaden Daniels has been outstanding. And the thing was, like, in week 2, that was a floor game for him, and he still had like 13 or 14 fantasy points. As you can see, Anthony Richardson's 4 games are losing you weeks. That's what he's doing. It's not Jaden Daniels. Terry is my only concern here because I saw a lot of this yesterday too. Where's Terry? Where's Terry on the top 30? Look, the reason I didn't put Terry on the top 30 is because I need to see more than just a couple big plays. Because you take out those 2 big plays, one of them was a touchdown, obviously. It was very similar to what he's been doing for you. So, you know, he's not going to hit that every week. The Bengals just stink defensively. So, you have to keep that into account. Although I will say, you know, with Anthony Richardson, you definitely could use an upgrade. And I don't hate the package. Like, Evans and Chuba, it's not a terrible package to give up. I think Jaden's extremely valuable in fantasy right now. And Terry, like, again, he's not entering my lineup personally. So I guess that's the one thing to keep in mind is, like, who's your backup plan for Mike Evans? Because, like, for me personally, Terry's not entering my lineup this week at least. I need to see at least another week of it. So, but I would take the trade. I would take the trade. I don't hate the package, and I love the upside that Jaden does. Now, what I will say to end this off is that with with Anthony Richardson, don't drop him. Do not drop Anthony Richardson. I want everybody to know that. You do not drop Anthony Richardson right now. You just do not drop him. It's not a good idea to drop him. Again, litmus test yourself. Would you pick up Anthony Richardson off the waiver wire if somebody dropped him in your league? If your answer is yes, then he's got trade value. So maybe wait a week to get Anthony Richardson to have a good one. This week is probably not the best versus the Steelers for him to have a big bounce back week, but at some point, Anthony Richardson will have another big week. It's going to happen. He's the type of player who can win you a week. So wait for that day, and then try to sell Anthony Richardson if you don't plan on playing him ever again. That's what I'll say about that. But I'm going to go ahead and call that a night, guys. I appreciate y'all being in here. Make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out. And again, if you want to support the channel, go to Underdog using the link in the description. Take advantage of the Patrick Mahomes line at 0.5 total yards this week. Deposit $10 on Underdog. They'll match you 50%. And they will give you the Patrick Mahomes Underdog line this week. So everybody have a good rest of your night. I'll see you all on tomorrow's kicker and tight end ranking video. Peace out, guys. Have a good rest of the night.